Did Jesus of Nazareth actually exist, or was he invented? Not by faith, not by scripture, but by hard historical evidence. For 2,000 years, billions have believed in him. But what can historians actually prove? Tonight, we're putting history itself on the stand. The artifact that shocked the world. If you were looking for proof, you might expect dusty scrolls or ancient manuscripts. Instead, the search exploded because of a small limestone bone box. In 2002, a 2,000-year-old ossuary surfaced with an inscription that stunned archaeologists. James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. If authentic, this would be the first physical artifact directly linking Jesus of Nazareth to a real object you could touch. An ossuary, by the way, was a common burial practice in Jerusalem. After a body decomposed, the bones were placed inside one of these stone boxers. This wasn't unusual, but the inscription was, and then everything changed. The Israel Antiquities Authority declared it a forgery, claiming the words brother of Jesus were added in modern times. What followed was a 5-year trial in Jerusalem watched by the world. The owner was acquitted, but here's the twist. The judge didn't rule it authentic. He ruled that it couldn't be proven fake. And that right there captures the entire search for the historical Jesus. Even when you think you've found proof, it becomes a debate. So before we go further, we need to address something bigger. The Christ myth theory. You've probably heard the argument. Jesus never existed. That he was a myth, a legend, borrowed from pagan stories. Here's what's critical to understand. Among professional historians, this is not considered a serious academic position. The real debate is not whether he existed, it's what we can actually know about him. Even Bart Ehrman, a leading New Testament scholar and agnostic atheist, affirms that Jesus was a real historical figure. Why? Because the alternative is far more complicated. For the myth theory to work, dozens of people would have had to invent a man, convince communities across the Roman Empire he was real, and sustain that story while eyewitnesses were still alive. Historically speaking, that's far less plausible than a real preacher whose message spread. Which brings us to the evidence. The earliest sources, and they're not the Gospels, this might surprise you. Our earliest reliable information doesn't come from the Gospels, it comes from Paul. Paul's letters were written roughly 20 to 30 years after the crucifixion, and Paul never met Jesus during his lifetime. Yet historians consider these letters incredibly valuable. Why? Because of what they casually mention. 3 details stand out. Jesus was called the Christ, meaning Messiah. He taught against divorce. He had a brother named James, who led the movement in Jerusalem. These aren't grand theological claims. They're ordinary details. And in historical research, ordinary details are gold. They're harder to invent and easier to verify. But Paul wasn't an outsider. So what did Rome say? Rome takes notice around the year 111 AD. A Roman governor named Pliny the Younger wrote a letter to Emperor Trajan. He had a problem. Christians were spreading rapidly in his province, and he didn't know how to deal with them. In his letter, he describes their behavior. They met before dawn. They took oaths not to commit crimes. They sang hymns to Christ as to a god. He even interrogated 2 female His conclusion: their movement was an excessive superstition. The emperor's reply is revealing. Don't hunt them down, Trajan said. But if they're formally accused and refuse to worship Roman gods, punish them. Notice something important. Rome wasn't debating theology. They weren't questioning if Jesus existed. They were responding to a movement built around a man they assumed was real. The historical Jesus versus the Christ of faith, and this is where things get complicated. Scholars draw a sharp distinction. The historical Jesus, the Jewish preacher reconstructed through evidence. The Christ of faith, the divine figure worshipped in churches. 2 different subjects, one studied with historical tools, the other through theology. And perhaps the most controversial attempt to separate the two came from the Jesus Seminar in the 1980s and 90s. Their method was almost theatrical. Scholars voted with colored beads on which sayings in the Gospels were authentic. Their conclusion: only about 18% likely trace back to the historical man. Their goal, as co-chair Robert Funk put it, was to set Jesus free from the prisons of Scripture. They weren't attacking belief. They were trying to uncover the man behind the tradition. The final question, after 2,000 years of faith, debate, scholarship, and devotion. Can you truly separate the man from the message? Is it possible to uncover Jesus of Nazareth without confronting the Christ of faith? Or have they become inseparable? That question is still being explored today, and it may never be fully answered. But one thing is clear. From Roman records to early letters to archaeological controversy, history overwhelmingly supports that a man named Jesus did exist. What you believe about him, beyond that, that's another story.